On the night of September 8, 2004, 12-year-old Tyler Holloway and his 15-year-old brother Jacob left their farmhouse in Maple Creek to ride their bikes down to their friend Carter's house, just 2 blocks away. The sun had barely set, the sky still stained with orange and pink, and the gravel roads were quiet as usual. They promised to be back before dinner. They never returned. What makes the case so chilling is how normal the evening had been. Their parents, Laura and Michael Holloway, said the boys weren't upset or acting strange. They left with their helmets on, their phones in their pockets, and even reminded their mum to save them slices of the pie cooling on the windowsill. But by 9 p.m, when their dinner sat untouched and there was no sign of them, the panic began. A neighbor had seen them ride past. Carter's mum swore they never arrived. By morning, every resident of Maple Creek was searching. Ditches, barns, cornfields, and the old bridge were combed by volunteers. Their bikes were found later that day, leaning against a bent fence near an abandoned property at the edge of town. The strange part? Both bikes were upright and neatly parked. There was no sign of a struggle, no footprints in the mud, no fingerprints on the handlebars, but the boys' own. Then, 2 days later, Tyler's phone turned on. It pinged from a cell tower nearly 73 miles away in a forest preserve that had been closed to the public for over a decade. Welcome back, Storiosity's videos. It was the kind of September evening that made Maple Creek feel like the safest place in the world. The summer heat had faded just enough to let the wind carry a gentle chill, and the smell of cut grass and distant firewood lingered in the air. Tyler Holloway was zipping up his red hoodie while his older brother Jacob adjusted the straps on his helmet. Their mum, Laura, was at the sink in the kitchen, half watching them through the window, half listening to the weather report on the radio. "Don't be long," she called out, "and take the flashlight." Jacob grabbed the small LED torch from the counter and shoved it into his hoodie pocket. With that, the brothers pedaled off into the fading sunlight. They followed the same route they always did, cutting behind the grain silos, then veering right at the Wilson barn, where the fence leaned just enough for them to sneak through. Their friend Carter's house was only a few minutes away. The gravel crunched beneath their tires, the air was still, and not a single car passed by. Jacob, ever the more serious of the two, was unusually quiet. Tyler noticed, but didn't ask. Maybe he was just tired. Or maybe it was the way the sky looked. Strange clouds, low and slow, seemed to be forming over the tree line just past the fields. Meanwhile, back at the Holloway home, dinner was nearly ready. Laura sliced into the chicken casserole while Michael checked the news on his laptop. "They'll be back any minute," she said, glancing at the clock. But when 20 minutes passed with no knock at the door and the pie still sat untouched on the sill, a slow unease began to bloom. It wasn't like Jacob to ignore a curfew. He was responsible, cautious, and never liked disappointing their parents. By 8:30 p.m, Michael was already pulling on his boots and grabbing the keys. Laura reached for the phone and called Carter's house. The voice on the other end gave her chills. They never came. Michael drove the route the boys would have taken. He passed the silos, slowed by the Wilson barn, and circled the block twice. No sign of them. No bikes, no jackets, no flashlight beam bouncing through the dark. When he returned empty-handed, just after 9 p.m, Laura was already dialing the sheriff's department. The dispatcher took down every detail calmly, but Michael could hear it in her voice, that practiced tone people use when they don't want to say what they're thinking. An hour later, a patrol car rolled into the driveway. Sheriff Danvers stepped out, flashlight in hand, notepad tucked into his back pocket. "Let's retrace their steps," he said. But even then, something about his eyes, made Laura feel like the boys were already slipping further away. By 10 p.m., half a dozen neighbors had joined the search. Flashlights swept across ditches, old farm sheds, and tree lines, while dogs barked in the distance. Sheriff Danvers walked alongside Michael, his boots crunching the same gravel road the boys had taken. They reached the Wilson barn within minutes. Just beside it, the old fence stood crooked, one of its wooden posts leaning like it had been kicked too many times. It was the usual shortcut the boys used, and, sure enough, faint bicycle tire marks trailed into the tall grass beyond. But there was something odd about them. The tracks didn't continue all the way to the edge of the field. They just stopped, as if the boys had lifted the bikes and vanished into thin air. Laura stayed behind with Carter's mother, who insisted again that the boys never arrived. Carter was waiting on the porch, she said, voice trembling. He even had 2 sodas out. He thought they'd just changed their minds, but Laura wasn't convinced. Jacob would never have skipped out without calling. Tyler was too excited about Carter's new gaming system to change plans last minute. Laura paced their living room as static hummed on the police radio. A part of her refused to believe anything bad could happen in Maple Creek. But another part, deep down, knew that something was terribly wrong. Back at the fence, Michael spotted something half buried near a patch of brush. It was Tyler's flashlight, still working, still glowing faintly in the dark. Sheriff Danvers knelt beside it and picked it up carefully with gloved hands. No dirt on the lens, he noted. No cracks either. Looks like it was placed here, not dropped. That one sentence made Michael's stomach turn. Placed by who? He asked, voice low. The sheriff didn't answer immediately. He stood, swept his flashlight across the field, and stared at the thin mist beginning to crawl along the ground. "We need more lights," he finally said. "And more people." By midnight, the volunteer search team had grown to nearly 20. Most were neighbors and relatives, all holding lanterns or phone flashlights. They spread out into the fields, calling the boys' names over and over. Tyler, Jacob. Nothing answered but the rustling of dry grass and the occasional hoot of an owl. At one point, 2 men found a faint path leading toward the woods that bordered the north end of town. Sheriff Danvers followed it carefully, but after 100 feet it simply faded into mud and leaves. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing disturbed. It was as if the boys had simply stepped off the road and vanished, leaving no trace, except that one glowing flashlight, still lying perfectly clean beside the fence. At sunrise, just as the dew settled over the cornfields, a deputy named Harper radioed in from the edge of Bellman's lot, an overgrown stretch of land that had once belonged to an old farmer but had remained unused for decades. "Found something," he said. Within minutes, Sheriff Danvers, Michael, and 2 other volunteers were on the scene. There, beside a dented barbed wire fence covered in morning mist, stood 2 bicycles, Jacob's silver mountain bike and Tyler's red BMX. Both were leaning upright, kickstands down, as if parked by someone who fully expected to return in a few minutes. The scene was eerily neat. The grass around the bikes was undisturbed. No tire ruts, no dragged lines, no scattered leaves or debris. Sheriff Danvers approached slowly, snapping on blue latex gloves. He checked the handlebars and seats. "No signs of struggle," he murmured. "Nothing broken." He took out his phone and snapped several photos before nodding to Harper to bag and tag the area. Laura arrived minutes later, breathless and shaking. When she saw the bikes, her knees buckled. "Why would they leave them here?" she whispered. People who I don't even know this place. Bellman's lot had always carried a certain reputation among locals. It was the kind of place teenagers whispered about, but never dared enter. Overgrown with twisted trees and bordered by a rusted fence, It had been fenced off for years after a sinkhole collapsed part of the southern end. No one lived near it, and there was no clear path leading in, but the boys' bikes suggested they had come here willingly, or been brought. Sheriff Danvers stood in silence, staring at the woods behind the lot, his breath visible in the cold morning air. Later that afternoon, tracking dogs were brought in from a neighbouring county. They sniffed the bikes, then began to pull toward the tree line beyond the lot. But 20 feet in, they stopped abruptly and began to whimper. Their handlers, confused, tried to coax them forward, but the dogs refused to move. Instead, they circled in place, barked once, and sat down. Sheriff Danvers ordered a team to sweep the area, but the results were the same. No footprints, no broken twigs, no pieces of clothing, just silence. It was as if something invisible had cut the trail cold. News spread quickly through Maple Creek. Parents kept their children indoors. The school sent home a notice spending outdoor activities. Reporters began arriving with cameras and questions no one could answer. Laura and Michael sat at home, watching the live news from their living room, still hoping this was all some elaborate mistake. But then, just as the second day was coming to a close, Tyler's cell phone pinged a cell tower 73 miles away. It connected for less than 2 minutes, long enough to send out a single signal. No call, no text, just a ghost signal from a forest preserve that hadn't been open to the public in over a decade. By the time Sheriff Danvers arrived at the station the next morning, a digital map was already glowing on the dispatch monitor. Tyler's phone had connected to a cell tower located on the eastern edge of Glasspine Preserve, a remote and heavily wooded area that had been sealed off since a massive storm destroyed its main hiking trail in 1992. Nobody went there anymore. The roads were crumbling, the forest overgrown, and the official warning signs still hung on the rusted gates. No entry, unsafe terrain. But now, something or someone had reactivated Tyler's phone from inside those very woods. Laura stared at the map in disbelief, her eyes tracing the winding highway that stretched between Maple Creek and Glasspine. "That's almost an hour and a half away," she whispered. "How would they get there? Jacob didn't even know how to drive." Sheriff Danvers didn't have an answer. No car had been reported stolen. No cameras on the main road had picked up anything unusual. And even more strange, after that 2-minute blip, Tyler's phone vanished again, never reconnecting to another tower, as if it had powered down, or worse, been destroyed. A team was assembled by noon. Danvers contacted the State Forest Service, requesting permission to search the preserve despite its closed status. They agreed under emergency protocol. By 3 p.m., a convoy of law enforcement and volunteers was making its way toward the old forest. Michael rode in the front vehicle, silent, eyes fixed on the dark line of trees that grew thicker as they neared. Laura had stayed behind, though not by choice. Sheriff Danvers had gently urged her to rest. She hadn't slept more than an hour since the night the boys disappeared. As they reached the outer fence of Glasspine, an uneasy quiet settled over the group. The wind moved through the treetops, but there were no birds, no insects. The only sound was the crunch of their boots on dead leaves. The gate had rusted shut, so the team climbed over the chain-link fence carefully, one by one. Inside, the forest was denser than they expected. Moss-covered trees leaned over the path like they were listening, and the deeper they walked in, the darker it became. The sunlight above felt dimmer somehow, like it was being filtered through something thicker than clouds. After nearly 40 minutes of slow hiking along the broken trail, the lead tracker held up a hand. He pointed down. There, half buried beneath a cluster of pine needles and soaked leaves, was a silver object. Sheriff Danvers knelt down and brushed the dirt aside. It was Tyler's phone. The screen was cracked, the battery long dead, but the casing was unmistakable, a bright sticker with his name on the back. Next to it was a small piece of torn fabric, navy blue with a familiar texture. "That's from Jakob's hoodie," Michael said, voice trembling. But there were no footprints, no food wrappers, no campfires. Just that one phone, lying in the middle of a forest no one was supposed to enter. The discovery of Tyler's phone brought both relief and dread. At least now there was a solid clue, but finding it so deep inside a forest the boys had never even heard of raised too many questions. Sheriff Danvers turned the phone over in his hands, careful not to smudge potential prints. The sticker with Tyler's name was faded but still intact. "We'll get this to the lab tonight," he said quietly. Michael stood nearby, arms crossed, staring into the darkness between the trees. This doesn't make sense. How could they have come all the way out here, on foot, in the middle of the night? And why? As the team spread out further into the preserve, they began marking trees with biodegradable tape to keep track of their route. The deeper they went, the stranger the environment became. The forest floor was unusually soft, like layers of moss and earth had settled over something older. Trees stood in unnatural formations, curved into arches or leaning at exact angles. One of the volunteers, a retired geologist named Vern, pointed out a strange pattern in the underbrush. "See this?" he said, kneeling down. "The plant growth here. It's like something heavy passed through this area, but only once. No backtracking, no return trail." 20 more minutes into the hike, the team found something even more unsettling. Nestled against the base of a fallen tree was a child's shoelace, bright green, speckled with dried mud. Sheriff Danvers picked it up slowly, turning it over. "Tyler's," Michael confirmed immediately. "His favorite color. He got them for his birthday last month." Nearby, a patch of disturbed soil suggested someone or something had crouched or knelt there, but again, no clear footprints. It was as though whatever left these pieces behind had been careful, almost deliberate, in avoiding obvious signs of passage. Just as the team prepared to move forward, Vern froze. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. Everyone stopped. At first it was silent. Then, softly like a whisper carried on the wind, came a faint, rhythmic sound. Tap, tap, tap. It echoed through the trees, too slow and steady to be natural. It didn't sound like an animal. It sounded intentional. Someone, or something, was tapping on wood. Sheriff Danvers raised his hand, signaling the group to hold position. The sound stopped. Complete silence fell again, thick and heavy. "We're not alone in here," one of the deputies muttered under his breath. Danvers didn't reply. He just turned and pointed forward. "Keep moving," he said, voice low. "We need to find out what else this place is hiding." The path narrowed as the group pressed forward, their breath visible in the unnatural chill that clung to the forest floor. Sheriff Danvers consulted his compass, then checked the GPS unit slung around his neck. The needle kept twitching and the screen flickered like it was struggling to stay online. "Something's interfering with the signal," he muttered. Michael, walking just behind him, pointed toward a break in the trees ahead. A soft light seemed to shimmer through the branches, though no one carried a lantern that bright. As they stepped through the thicket, they emerged into a wide clearing, perfectly round and lined with rocks, each one flat, evenly spaced, and etched with markings none of them recognized. In the center of the clearing stood a single wooden bench, weathered, grey, and deeply sunken into the moss-covered ground. It looked like it had been there for decades, yet the wood was intact, not rotted. Resting on the seat, untouched by leaves or debris, was a child's backpack. Michael rushed forward before anyone could stop him. He recognized it instantly. "Tyler's," he said, unzipping it. Inside were a few notebooks, a pack of gum, and a photo of the two boys from last summer, taken during a fishing trip both of them smiling, with their arms slung around each other's shoulders. Danvers motioned to the team to spread out around the perimeter of the clearing. Vern walked the circle of stones, eyes narrowed. "These aren't random," he said. "They're laid in a pattern. Could be cultural or something else." One deputy began taking photos while another sketched the symbols on paper. Michael sat on the bench beside the backpack, head in his hands. "Why would they leave it here? Why not take it with them?" No one answered. The silence of the clearing pressed in around them, and the temperature continued to drop. Then came another sound, not the steady tapping from earlier, but something softer, a child's voice, distant, faint, carried by the wind like a memory. "Jacob," it said. Everyone froze. "Did you hear that?" whispered one of the volunteers. Danvers raised his hand again, but no one moved. The voice came once more. "Tyler." This time it seemed closer, but there were no figures in the trees, no footprints around the clearing, and no trace of anyone else. The group stood in stunned silence until the sound faded. "We need to log everything here," Danvers said. "This whole site." Before nightfall. But as the last word left his mouth, the wind picked up suddenly, swirling the dead leaves into the air, and in the center of the clearing, the photo inside Tyler's backpack fluttered out and landed face down on the moss. Someone turned it over. The faces in the image were gone, blurred into nothing but silhouettes. The team returned to Maple Creek late that evening, weary and shaken. Sheriff Danvers secured Tyler's backpack and phone in the evidence room, but the strange stone patterns and the whispered voices in the clearing haunted every person who had been there. Michael stayed behind at the station, staring at the few contents of the bag. He pulled out the small spiral-bound notebook from the front pouch. Its cover had a blue sticker labeled Science Notes, but the pages inside were far from academic. The first half contained drawings, some simple, others more intricate. Most were of trees, spirals, and oddly shaped doorways. The last few pages, however, contained hurried, uneven handwriting. Michael's eyes locked onto a passage dated a week before the disappearance. "Jake said he hears things at night. Not dreams, whispers, like someone calling from the trees behind the barn. He made me promise not to tell Mom. Last night, I heard them too." The next entry was even stranger. "There's a place in the woods that shows up in our dreams. It's real, I know it is. I think someone wants us to go there." Michael closed the notebook slowly, his heart pounding. These weren't just the fantasies of a bored 12-year-old. The handwriting was frantic, unsure, as if Tyler was writing down something he didn't quite understand, but felt deeply afraid of. The following morning, Sheriff Danvers called in a handwriting analyst from the county. She confirmed that the notes were consistent with Tyler's style, but said something else had caught her attention. "These lines," she said, pointing to certain phrases, "show signs of precious hesitation." He was scared. Not just imaginative, genuinely disturbed. "And this spiral here," she added, referencing a repeated doodle. "It's a symbol found in a number of historic contexts, often relating to doors, portals, or time." Danvers frowned. "You mean like superstition?" She nodded. "Maybe. Or folklore. But either way, it's not random." Laura, still reeling from the discovery, sat at the dining table that evening, holding one of Tyler's old sweatshirts. Her hands trembled as she replayed the journal entries in her mind. Jacob had always been the quiet one, the protector. Tyler was the dreamer, but even he never spoke like this before. Not about whispers, not about doorways. She walked to the kitchen drawer, pulled out a folder where she kept old drawings, and sifted through them. Her fingers stopped on a page Jacob had sketched just 2 months earlier. It was a crude map of trees, a clearing, and a bench at the center. In the corner, written in block letters, was a phrase she never noticed until now. We already saw it. Now it wants us back. The next morning arrived under a heavy lead-colored sky. A low mist curled along the edges of Maple Creek, sticking to the fields like a warning. Sheriff Danvers met with his team at the station. Everyone was tired, tense, and unusually quiet. He placed Tyler's notebook, Jacob's map drawing, and the photograph with the blurred faces onto the table. These kids weren't just wandering into the woods, he said. They were being drawn to something. Something they believed was real. Deputy Harper leaned in, studying the photo again. "But how do you explain the missing faces?" he asked. "This was a printed photo, not digital. Someone had to tamper with it." Danvers shook his head. "No smudges, no water damage, just blank silhouettes." He glanced toward Michael, who sat at the edge of the room. "You said they started acting differently before they disappeared." Michael hesitated. "Not exactly, but Jacob, he started going to bed earlier. Said he was tired even when he hadn't done anything all day. Tyler stopped playing video games for a while, just kept doodling in that notebook." Danvers sighed, then tapped the spiral sketch again. "There's a pattern here. I don't know what it means yet, but we're missing something." Later that day a storm rolled through town. Lightning cracked far off in the distance, and the air grew humid and thick. As Laura stood at the kitchen sink watching the sky, something caught her attention. A faint, high-pitched whistle echoed through the trees behind their property. It was a strange sound, like wind blowing through a hollow pipe, but rhythmic, intentional. She stepped onto the porch, straining to listen. It came again, this time closer. And then, suddenly, it stopped. Her heart raced. She remembered what Tyler had written in his journal. It starts with the whistle. Then the dreams come. That evening, she told Danvers about the sound. He nodded slowly, saying others had begun reporting strange noises too. Not just whistles, low hums, tapping on windows, or soft voices at night. One woman on the north end of town claimed her front door had been open when she woke up, though she always locked it. Another man said his porch light flickered every night at exactly 2:17 a.m., and his dog refused to go outside. Danvers ordered his team to log every report, no matter how minor. "Whatever this is," he told them, "it's not isolated. It's moving through town. Watching, listening." By nightfall, Michael sat in the boys' room, going through their drawers for the 100th time. In the bottom of Jacob's desk he found a folded sheet of paper pressed between two books. It wasn't a drawing, it was a list of times, specific ones. 1:43 a.m., 3:12 a.m., 4:08 a.m. Next to each was a word or two. Whisper. Cold. Footsteps. The last line was circled twice. 5:11. I am. The trees opened. The next day, Sheriff Danvers received a call from a man named Leon Grady, a retired wildlife photographer who once camped regularly near Glasspine Preserve before it was closed. His voice trembled with hesitation. "I think I saw those boys before they went missing," he said. "Not in town, in the forest, weeks ago." Danvers raised an eyebrow. "You're sure it was them?" Leon paused. More of them wore a red hoodie, the younger one. He looked confused, lost, but when I called out, he just turned and walked into the woods. Leon explained that he had entered the outer edge of the preserve a few times since retirement, ignoring the signs. "I know it's not allowed," he admitted, "but I swear I'm not making this up." That afternoon, Leon met with the sheriff and brought a battered camera bag. "I wasn't trying to take pictures of people," he said, "but I might have caught something." He handed Danvers an SD card. Most of the images were landscapes, close-ups of moss or distant deer, but one photo, taken near a sloped ridge on the east side of the preserve, clearly showed a figure in the background. It was blurry, partially hidden in the trees, but there was no mistaking the red sleeve. "That's Tyler's hoodie," Danvers whispered. They zoomed in further. Just beyond Tyler's shoulder, barely visible through the trees, was what looked like the edge of a structure, weathered, broken, and leaning sideways like a collapsed cabin. Laura nearly dropped the photo when Danvers showed her. "That's him," she said instantly. "But he's not looking at Leon. He's looking at something else." She pointed to the tree line, her voice dropping. "He looks afraid." The photo was sent to the lab, but analysis revealed something strange. The timestamp on the image was August 23, 2 full weeks before the boys disappeared. "That can't be right," Danvers muttered. Tyler was in school that week. He was home. But Leon was firm. "I never changed the settings on my camera. That's when I took it. Late afternoon. Sunlight was low." With permission from the Forestry Service, Danvers, Leon, and a few deputies returned to the ridge in the photo. It took hours of careful climbing and navigation, but they eventually found the spot. The ground was disturbed, the moss flattened, and under a thicket of vines stood what remained of an old one-room cabin. The roof had caved in long ago, the door hung off its hinges. Inside, the air was cold and still. In one corner, half covered by leaves and dust, was a child's drawing, weathered, barely intact, but unmistakably done in crayon. 2 stick figures stood beneath a crooked tree, one with red scribbled on its arms. Danvers looked around. "They were here," he said, voice hushed. "Not by accident. They came here for a reason." Leon took a few steps back, uneasy. But why would they come alone? Danvers looked back toward the dark opening in the trees behind them. "Maybe they weren't alone," he said quietly. "Maybe something was waiting for them." Back at the sheriff's office, the drawing recovered from the collapsed cabin was carefully photographed and preserved. Laura stared at it for hours, her eyes drawn to the single detail others had overlooked, a tiny mark beneath one of the stick figures. It wasn't a crayon stroke, it was a word, written in very small, jagged letters. "Help." She felt the breath leave her lungs. This wasn't a child's game or imagination. Her boys were reaching out. Somewhere, somehow, they had left a message. But when, and from where? Sheriff Danvers decided it was time to re-examine the cabin site with greater care. The next morning he assembled a team of forensic experts, including a handwriting analyst and a structural engineer. They returned to the ridge, this time with ground radar equipment and advanced scanning tools. The inside of the cabin had been buried in years of forest debris, but as they cleared the layers away, more markings became visible. The back wall, beneath what remained of a peeling wooden shelf, was covered in faint pencil scratches, dozens of them. Some were names, others were symbols. One stood out. Initials, Jacob Holloway. Danvers ran his fingers just above the mark. They were here, no doubt about it. A hidden compartment was discovered under the cabin floorboards. Inside was a rusted tin box containing 3 torn notebook pages and an old disposable camera. The pages were damp but readable. Written in blocky handwriting was a mix of what appeared to be a diary and instructions. The woods shift. Don't trust the path. We see light sometimes, but it leads the wrong way. If someone finds this, we're still here. Laura, upon reading the lines, broke down into silent tears. Her boys were fighting to be found. That camera was immediately rushed back to the station. Danvers knew film development would take time, but it might be their biggest lead yet. That night, Laura had a dream she would never forget. She stood in the middle of the clearing, the one with the stones, and both her sons were there. But they didn't speak. They pointed. Behind them, a tall, dark shape moved among the trees, flickering like a shadow cut loose from anything solid. She woke up with her hands trembling. At exactly 3:12 a.m., the power flickered in the house. The lights blinked. The hallway clock reset, and her phone showed no service. Laura sat upright in bed, staring out the window. Across the field, near the tree line, a small light hovered, glowing red, then vanishing without a sound. The disposable camera recovered from the cabin was handed over to a technician at the state crime lab the next morning. Sheriff Danvers, unable to wait, called in a favor and had the film developed within the same day. When the prints arrived, sealed in a flat envelope, Danvers opened it with shaking hands. There were 12 photos in total. Most were overexposed or dark blurs, the kind common when a flash camera is used in low light, but 3 of them stood out. One showed a close-up of what looked like a carved wooden symbol, similar to the spiral Tyler had drawn repeatedly in his notebook. Another showed a forest path at night, but the trees in the background appeared bent, unnaturally twisted toward the camera. It was the final image that chilled Danvers the most. It was blurry but recognizable. 2 boys standing side by side in what appeared to be the same forest clearing with the stones. Tyler was looking down, holding something in his hand. Jacob, taller, stared straight into the camera, his expression flat. Behind them, faint and out of focus, was a vertical shape resembling a door frame, but no door. No hinges, just 2 standing beams, half covered in ivy. It looked as though it had been there for decades. "They took this themselves," Danvers whispered. "They were documenting something." Danvers showed the photos to Laura and Michael that afternoon. Laura trembled as she studied the last one. "That's Jacob's shirt," she confirmed, "and Tyler always wears his hood like that when he's scared." Michael was already zooming in on the background. "This structure, it's not natural," he muttered. "It's made of wood, planted like a doorway." Danvers nodded slowly. "And if they were trying to leave us a trail, this might be where it ends." The team prepared to return to the clearing the next day, armed with metal detectors, high-powered lights, and motion sensors. But that night something strange happened in town. A teenage girl named Marissa, who lived 3 houses down from the Holloways, ran into the sheriff's office just before midnight. "I saw them," she said, out of breath, "in the trees. I swear I saw 2 boys standing at the edge of my backyard." She described them in perfect detail, one in a red hoodie, the other in a navy shirt. "They were just watching, not moving, but when I stepped outside they were gone." Danvers rushed to the location. No tracks, no sign of entry. But the grass was flattened in 2 perfect footprints, side by side. The next morning, as Danvers prepared to return to the forest, Laura called him, her voice barely audible. "There was something in the living room last night," she said. "The photo from Tyler's notebook, the one with the spiral. It was lying on the coffee table when I woke up. I didn't put it there. I haven't touched that drawer in days." Danvers paused, then asked, "Do you still have Jacob's drawing, the one with the map?" Laura nodded. "Then pack it. We're going back to that clearing, and this time we'll go past the stones." The return to the clearing was planned with precision. Sheriff Danvers led a team of 5, Deputy Harper, Leon Grady the photographer, a local historian named Edith Geller, and Michael Holloway. Each carried headlamps, GPS trackers, and radios tuned to a private frequency. The morning fog clung to the base of the trees like a warning, but they pressed on. By early afternoon they reached the stone-lined circle once again. The air was colder than expected, and the clearing felt quieter than before, unnaturally still, as if sound itself refused to move through it. Michael opened Jacob's old map and laid it flat on a dry patch of moss. The drawing showed a line that extended beyond the bench, curving around the edge of the clearing and heading west. "This path isn't visible," he said, eyes scanning the trees. But he drew it like he walked it. Edith stepped forward and turned slowly in place. "Do you smell that?" she asked. The air carried a faint scent, damp wood, moss, and something sweet, almost metallic. "That's not natural," she added. Danvers gave the signal, and the team stepped beyond the stones, their boots crunching on pine needles and damp leaves. As they moved west, the terrain began to shift. The moss thickened, climbing higher up the trees like a slow tide. The branches above intertwined into an arched canopy, dimming the light. After 20 minutes of slow progress, they reached it, the structure from the photo. 2 vertical beams stood in the ground, perfectly aligned, forming what looked like a doorway to nowhere. Vines crawled up the sides, but the beams remained untouched by rot or moss. Leon raised his camera, but when he tried to take a photo, the device shut off. "Battery's just drained," he muttered. "It was full this morning." Michael stepped forward, reaching toward the wooden frame. Before his hand touched it, the air seemed to vibrate faintly, but undeniably. "Do you feel that?" he asked. Harper nodded slowly. "It's like a hum, low frequency, like standing next to a generator." Sheriff Danvers walked around the structure, inspecting the ground. Beneath the soil was a smooth, flat stone, partially buried. He began brushing it clean. Etched into its surface was the same spiral symbol Tyler had drawn. Edith pulled a flashlight from her bag and examined the carvings along the beams. "This isn't just wood," she said. "This was placed here with purpose. This is ceremonial, maybe even ancient." As they stood in silence, Michael's radio crackled. A faint sound came through, distorted but unmistakable. It was a child's voice, calling his name. "Dad?" He dropped the radio, frozen in place. Danvers picked it up, adjusting the volume, but the voice was gone, just static. Harper tried his radio, dead. Edith's too. Leon's was the only one still working, but only on an open channel filled with static. They looked around, suddenly realizing the air had grown even colder. Then something else happened. The light dimmed, not like a cloud passing overhead, but as if the entire forest was darkening. Slowly, deliberately, Danvers stepped back. "Time to go," he said. "We mark this and come back with full support. We're not alone here." The team left the forest just before sunset, uneasy and silent on the drive back. Sheriff Danvers reviewed the footage from the body cameras, hoping to find something definitive. Most of it captured only what they saw with their eyes, the doorway, the spiral stone, the trees closing in, but not the voice Michael had heard through the radio. That recording was gone. Static had overridden it completely, but when Danvers replayed the audio in slow motion, he picked up something else. Beneath the hiss of white noise was a low, rhythmic thud, almost like a pulse, faint but steady, as if something was moving underground. Edith Geller spent the night studying symbols found on the stone slab and the wooden beams. She cross-referenced them with old texts, folklore, and regional carvings from early settlers. Around midnight, she called Danvers. "I found something," she said, voice tense, in an 1886 journal written by a surveyor named Emery Stroud. He mapped this region and recorded strange findings, mentions of doorways in the woods, strange noises underground, and children who vanished for days, only to return with no memory. She paused. In one entry, he said, a doorway made of pine stood on the edge of the western wood, surrounded by stones and silence. When he returned the next day, it was gone. Laura Holloway couldn't sleep that night. She wandered through the boys' empty room, pausing to straighten the beds, check the closet, run her hand over Jacob's bookshelf. As she adjusted the curtains, she caught movement from the corner of her eye. something just past the edge of the yard, near the line of trees. She squinted. For a second she saw two figures standing there, one taller, one smaller, but when she blinked, they were gone. Her chest tightened, and she backed away from the window. Then her phone buzzed, a single notification. New note added to Tyler's cloud account. But that was impossible. His phone was in evidence custody, powered off and logged by the state. Sheriff Danvers arrived at the Holloway home within minutes. Laura handed him her phone. The note had no title. Just a sentence written in Tyler's usual typing style. "We're not lost. We're underneath it. It's not where it looks." Danvers called the lab to confirm that the boy's phone had not been powered on. They verified the device was secure, powered down, and had not connected to any network. Laura stared at the message, then whispered, "What does he mean, underneath it?" Danvers didn't respond at first. He just glanced toward the woods. "He's not talking about location," he finally said. "He's talking about something else. Layers. Depth." And suddenly, the pulsing sound in the radio recording made more sense. Whatever had taken the boys was still moving, and it was beneath their feet. The next morning, Sheriff Danvers requested satellite imagery of the Glasspine Preserve area. He hoped to compare recent visuals to those from previous decades, looking for signs of the wooden structure or changes in the terrain. When the files arrived, he and Deputy Harper pored over them side by side. The tree canopy was dense, but in one particular shot from 8 years ago, they noticed something peculiar, a clearing with a ring-like shape that hadn't appeared in older images. It matched the size and location of the stone circle, but in the newest images, the clearing was gone, completely consumed by trees. "That doesn't make sense," Harper said. "We were just there yesterday. How is it gone now?" Danvers frowned and layered the images manually. It was subtle, but clear. The forest was shifting. Trees moving, paths disappearing. "Either this area is unstable," he muttered, "or it's hiding something intentionally." He reached out to Edith Geller again, who was already deep into Straub's journal. "Listen to this," she said. "Straub wrote about a living forest, not metaphorically. He believed certain parts of the woods weren't fixed, that they moved at will, creating or erasing paths, depending on who walked them." She flipped a page. "And he believed the forest chose who entered the space and who returned." At the Holloway house, Michael found Jacob's backpack still sitting in the hallway closet. He opened the front pouch and discovered something he hadn't seen before, a folded page torn from one of his son's notebooks. It was a crude drawing, a circle with arrows pointing inward, and at the center a dark square. On the bottom were 2 words, "It sinks." Michael immediately took the drawing to the sheriff. Danvers stared at it, then pulled up the spiral stone photo from the clearing. The spiral led inward in the same way. "This isn't just a symbol," Danvers said. "It's a map, a direction, maybe even a warning." That night, strange phenomena rippled through Maple Creek again. More residents reported tapping sounds at their windows, objects moving without explanation, and fleeting images of children standing in shadow. One man called to say his basement door, sealed for years, was wide open when he woke up, and muddy footprints led up the stairs before vanishing. Sheriff Danvers, concerned for the public, called a town meeting the next morning. He didn't tell them everything, but he warned them not to enter the forest. "There's something in those woods," he said, "and it's not done yet." After the meeting, Laura returned home to find her answering machine blinking. A message had arrived during the gathering. She pressed play. The voice was crackled and faint, like it came through layers of static, but it was unmistakably Jacob's. "Mom, we're still here. Don't come the normal way." The forest will fold you. Follow the code. Then the message ended. The timestamp read 4:08 AM. The exact time written on Jacob's hidden list. The message from Jacob shifted everything. Sheriff Danvers had the recording analyzed immediately. The technician confirmed it wasn't spliced, altered, or synthetic. "It's a real voice," he said, "but it didn't come from any cell network I can trace. No number, no origin." Danvers stared at the timestamp again. 4:08 AM, the same hour Jacob had circled on his time log. "The forest will fold you," Jacob had said. Danvers repeated it aloud, troubled by the phrasing. Not trap, not confuse, fold. Like layers, like paper, like reality itself was bending inward somewhere inside Glasspine Preserve. Later that afternoon, a call came from a geotechnical firm based 2 towns over. One of their survey drones had recorded unusual seismic readings near Maple Creek over the past month. Shallow disturbances, the report said. No tectonic activity, but something's moving underground, slow and rhythmic, almost like a pattern. They offered to send scanning equipment to map the subsurface layers beneath the preserve. Danvers agreed without hesitation. That night he sat at his desk, overlaying Jacob's hand-drawn map, Tyler's spiral drawings, and the new seismic grid. They aligned too well to be coincidence. A shape was forming beneath the surface, a ring, with a hollow center. Michael Holloway, restless and desperate, returned to the clearing alone before dawn, despite Danvers' warning. Armed with only a lantern and a copy of Jacob's drawing, he stepped past the stones and followed the coldest pockets of air, exactly as Jacob's message instructed. The forest grew darker around him, no birds, no wind, just a growing sensation that the path was somehow descending, even though he wasn't climbing or dropping. Then, as the fog lifted slightly, he found something unexpected. A metal trapdoor embedded in the ground, rusted, heavy, unlocked. He opened it. A wooden ladder stretched downward into blackness. A cold wind rose from below, carrying the faint scent of damp earth and something older. Michael hesitated, then shouted both boys' names. No answer, but the cold intensified, almost pulling at him. He didn't descend, not yet. Instead, he snapped several photos and climbed back up, sealing the hatch behind him. When he returned to town, he handed the sheriff the images. "It's real," he said. "They're not lost in the trees. They're below them." That night, Laura found one of Jacob's books on his bed. She hadn't left it there. It was a collection of folk tales from the region, some dark, some whimsical, but one story stood out now. It was called The Beneath Path. In it, 2 siblings discover a door hidden in a ring of stones. The younger one hears whispers. The older one tries to protect him. In the end, only the younger returns changed, quiet, and unable to sleep near a mirror. The final line read, "Libby went below, but the forest never let go." The following morning, Sheriff Danvers gathered his team for a briefing. He laid out the photos Michael had taken of the trapdoor, then detailed the seismic patterns and the recent voice message. "Everything we've found," he said, "points to this. A structure beneath the preserve. It's not on any old maps, not part of any mining record or foundation, but something is down there. And it may be where the boys were taken, or where they went willingly." He assigned specific roles. Deputy Harper would coordinate with the ground-penetrating radar team. Edith would continue historical research, and a tactical unit from the county would accompany him and Michael to the hatch site. "We go down," Danvers said, "but we do it right." Laura insisted on being involved. Danvers hesitated, then handed her a radio. "You stay at base camp. If anything happens, anything at all, you contact us." She nodded, eyes glassy but steady. That afternoon the group returned to the clearing and found the trapdoor untouched. The area around it had grown even colder. Despite the rising summer temperature, the ladder beneath the hatch descended into pitch black. Past the range of their flashlights, a long rope light was lowered first, illuminating the tight shaft. Walls of stone and wood framed the descent. At the bottom, 35 feet down, was a narrow hallway lined with rotted beams. Danvers led the descent. Michael followed, his hand white-knuckled on each rung. As they reached the bottom, the radios began to crackle with faint interference. Harper's voice buzzed with static above them, reading you faintly, "Maintain line of sight," then silence. The stone hallway ahead stretched into darkness, carved unevenly like it had been dug out centuries ago. There were symbols on the walls, drawn in charcoal and moss spirals, arrows and stick figures with their arms raised. One wall had a message scratched into the stone. To go forward is to go deeper. To return is to forget. They moved slowly, lights bouncing off damp rock and crumbling support beams. After nearly 30 yards, the tunnel widened into a chamber. The ceiling curved into a dome. At the center stood a stone pillar with a spiral carved deep into its surface, and wrapped around its base was a strip of red cloth. Michael rushed forward. "Tyler's hoodie," he whispered. It was torn, but unmistakable. He held it to his chest as Danvers circled the room. On the far wall was a series of narrow wooden doors, 4 of them lined up in perfect symmetry. None had knobs or hinges, just vertical slats, each marked with different symbols: a tree, a mirror, a spiral, and a figure with no face. Danvers reached out to the door with the spiral. As his fingers brushed the wood, a vibration pulsed through the room. The lights flickered. The air grew thin. Then a voice echoed through the chamber, young, breathless, and distant. "Dad, we're so close, but it's not a straight line. You have to follow the memory." Michael staggered back. "That was Jacob," he said. "He's not just speaking, he's leading us." Danvers lowered his hand. "Then we follow, but we do it carefully." And with that they marked the chamber, documented every inch, and prepared for what came next. Choosing the right door. The descent chamber grew colder with every passing second. Sheriff Danvers stood still, his hand hovering near the door marked with a spiral. The other 3 doors remained untouched, ominous in their silence. Michael moved closer, still clutching the piece of Tyler's hoodie, its fabric damp and fraying at the edges. "If they're behind one of these," he said softly, "how do we know which one?" Edith's voice came through the radio from the surface. "Sheriff, I've been reading more of Stroud's notes. He mentions a chamber of 4 doors. Only one leads forward. The others don't open. But he said something strange, that the right door doesn't open like a door. It remembers you, the channel cut with a sharp crack of static." Danvers motioned for Michael to stand back. He inspected the spiral-marked door again. There was no seam, no latch, no gap around the edges. It looked more like a wall than an entryway, but when he pressed his palm flat against the wood, it grew warm beneath his touch, just slightly, enough to feel unnatural in the damp cold. Michael stepped forward and did the same. The moment both of their hands touched the door, something changed. The spiral began to shift, not physically, but visually, like the carving itself was moving inside the wood. Then, from somewhere deep within, a faint click echoed through the tunnel. The door slid open without a sound. Behind it, a short corridor led downward at a sharp angle, carved entirely from stone. At the end was a second chamber, smaller, more confined, but filled with the unmistakable sound of air moving, breathing. A low rhythm, almost human, pulsed from the far wall. Danvers raised his flashlight, revealing a mural. It was a rough charcoal drawing, faded but legible. Two boys, one taller, one smaller, stood beneath a jagged tree, surrounded by spirals. Beneath them was a single word, etched deeper than the rest. Ekun. Michael's breath caught. Jacob used that word once, when he was little. He used to say he could hear echoes that didn't bounce back. Danvers examined the room's edges and found a small recess in the wall like a shelf. Inside it lay a small object, wrapped in waxed cloth. He unfolded it carefully. It was a pocket recorder, the kind with tiny magnetic tapes. He pressed play. Static hissed at first, then a voice. Jacob's. If you find this, we're not where you think. We went down, but the place doesn't stay the same. Every time we move, it moves. But if you remember us, really remember, we can stay still long enough for you to reach us. Danvers turned to Michael. They're alive, somewhere in this place, beneath all this. But it's not about searching anymore. It's about remembering, pulling them into the place where we are, instead of chasing where they were. Michael whispered, then we have to give them something to hold on to, something real. Danvers nodded. We find the echo and make it loud enough to bring them home. Back on the surface, Edith had been poring through every document Emery Stroud had left behind. One journal entry caught her attention more than the others. It read, to cross into the echo chamber safely, one must carry a memory strong enough to tether both time and presence. Without it, the forest takes you not the body, but the self. She immediately radioed Danvers. You need a memory, she said. Something personal, something the boys will recognize. Straub called it an anchor. You can't go further without one. Danvers paused. What kind of memory? Something deeply familiar, Edith said. A physical object, a story, a phrase, anything that exists only between the boys and you. Michael opened his backpack and pulled out a small object wrapped in tissue. I brought this, he said, unwrapping a tiny, worn-out action figure, a capeless superhero Tyler had carried around for years. He used to pretend it could fix anything, Michael whispered. He even said it protected him from nightmares. Danvers nodded. That's the anchor. They returned to the second chamber. The air felt thicker now, the kind that pressed against skin rather than moved past it. The wall across from the mural had begun to shift its surface, rippling like water under wind. Danvers placed the recorder gently in the corner and stepped back. Michael knelt and placed the action figure beneath the mural. As soon as it touched the floor, the stone beneath it brightened, not glowing, not radiant, just present, as if a new light source had briefly remembered how to shine. Then the wall ahead split slightly, not like a door this time, but like two veils pulling apart. On the other side was another passage, longer, darker, and different. It sloped downward, but with each step the sensation of gravity changed. Up became uncertain, down felt sideways. Stay focused, Danvers warned. No looking back. As they moved deeper, sound began to return. Quiet murmurs, like distant voices speaking through walls. Michael froze. That's Tyler, he said. I hear him. Danvers couldn't make out words, only tones, like the essence of a voice rather than the voice itself. Then the passage opened into a domed chamber filled with dozens of stone alcoves. Some were empty. Others held toys, books, shoes, all aged and forgotten. A hollow space in the center had been cleared, as if someone had lived there. At the far end was another object, Tyler's second sneaker, the one missing since day 2. It rested on a folded sweatshirt, and beside it, carved into the floor, were words scratched hurriedly by a small hand. If this is the right memory, we'll stay. Don't let it change again. Don't forget us. Michael fell to his knees. He picked up the shoe, pressed it to his chest, and closed his eyes. Tyler, Jacob, I'm right here, he said. I remember everything. Come back to it. Stay in it. And then, behind him, a sound, quiet footsteps. 2 of them. Slow. Familiar. Michael turned around slowly, breath held, eyes wide. Behind him, the dim chamber flickered faintly, light catching on the curved stone walls. For a moment, nothing. Then movement. Just past the edge of the passage, 2 shadows emerged. Not shapes cast by light, but shadows with presence. One smaller, the other taller. They didn't walk. They drifted like memories unspooling. Tyler, Michael called softly. Jacob? The shadows paused. The smaller one tilted its head. There was a ripple in the air, like heat rising from pavement, and then a blink. The shadows snapped into form, no longer silhouettes, but outlines. Real, present. And then, for a breathless instant, 2 boys stood before them. Jacob's navy hoodie was dirt-streaked, his face pale but clear. Tyler looked thinner, his red hoodie torn at the shoulder. They blinked, confused, and then Jacob spoke. Dan? His voice cracked with disbelief. Tyler stepped forward, arms out, but the space between them shimmered, resisting. We're still in it, Jacob whispered. He doesn't want to let go. Danvers stepped beside Michael, holding the pocket recorder. He pressed play again. Jacob's recorded voice echoed through the room. Remember us. The room pulsed, the walls groaned quietly, and one of the alcoves behind them collapsed, spilling dust and darkness into the chamber. Suddenly, the spiral on the floor began to glow faintly, like an ember reigniting. It's the anchor, Danvers said. Hold it? Say something only they would know. Michael held the action figure up, voice shaking. Tyler, do you remember the night you slept in the tent during the thunderstorm? You said this guy kept the lightning away. You made me promise to keep him safe if you ever got scared again. Tyler's eyes filled with tears. You still have it? Michael nodded, and as he held the figure toward them, the resistance in the air dissolved like fog burning away. And the boys rushed forward. Michael wrapped his arms around both, pulling them in. They were cold, bone cold, but real, breathing. Danvers scanned the chamber. We need to go, now. But before they could retrace their steps, Tyler looked back. There's more, he whispered. Others, I saw them. Kids, hiding. Jacob nodded. They don't talk, they just wait. Danvers turned to the alcoves, now shifting, some emptying as if whatever was inside had moved. This place, he said, it holds echoes of everyone. It traps. If they're still here, we'll come back. But we get you out first. As they moved toward the spiral doorway, the chamber trembled. Not violently, but rhythmically, like the sound of something breathing slower and slower, as if slipping into sleep. The passage behind them dimmed. Don't look back, Danvers warned. Just walk. Tyler clutched the action figure. Jacob held his father's hand. They stepped into the corridor and passed through the shifting wall. Behind them, the spiral dimmed to ash. Ahead of them, a cold breeze blew upward toward the trap-door. They were coming home. The climb back to the surface was slow and cautious. Sheriff Danvers led the way, scanning every step with his flashlight while radioing to the team above. Static crackled in response but carried no voice. Still, the ladder was intact. The same rusted rungs, the same scent of cold earth. Michael followed with Tyler and Jacob between them, each boy silent, breathing shallow, as if waking from a long dream. Their hands never let go of his. "Almost there," he whispered, more to himself than to them. When they reached the final rung and emerged into the fading daylight, Edith and Harper were waiting. Laura was there too. The moment she saw her boys, she ran, collapsing to her knees and pulling them both into her arms. Neither spoke at first. They simply held her, pressed their faces against her coat, and cried. Harper wiped his eyes and muttered, "I'll be damned." Edith stood speechless, one hand over her mouth. Danvers didn't interrupt. He gave the family their moment while turning to inspect the trapdoor again. It looked older now, the rust thicker, the hinges dry and stiff. He knelt, ran his fingers across the metal. It felt colder than before. He glanced back toward the clearing. The spiral stones were already beginning to lose their shape. Tyler was the first to speak. "We were walking for a long time, but the rooms didn't stay the same." Laura rocked him gently. "You're home now," she said. "It's over." But Jacob looked back toward the trees. "No," he whispered, "it's not." When asked what he meant, he didn't answer. He just stared at the forest's edge, where the trees swayed without wind. "It didn't close behind us," he finally said. "It just turned away." Danvers stepped closer. "Is there anyone else still down there?" Jacob nodded slowly. "Yes, but they're deeper, and they don't remember how to be found." Back at the Holloway home, the boys were bathed, fed, and checked by a physician. Aside from minor dehydration and weight loss, they were physically fine. But their behavior remained off. They flinched at mirrors, refused to sleep near windows. Tyler cried softly when the lights went out. Laura kept a lamp on in every room. That night, Jacob woke up twice, calling for his father. "Don't let it fold," he kept saying, "the room. Keep it open, just in case." Danvers reviewed the body cam footage with Edith. Much of it was corrupted, sound distorted, video flickering. The recorder's message had vanished. The mural was still visible, but the spiral had dulled. He stared at the footage of the moment the boys returned, when they stepped through the stone doorway. The image blurred slightly, as if something else followed them. Not a person, not a figure, just a shimmer, a suggestion. He paused the video, leaned back and said quietly, "Something came with them." And in the Holloway house, while the family finally slept under the same roof again, the baby monitor in the living room clicked on by itself. Static. Then a faint voice, young, breathy, distant. "In how they..." I remember, 2 days after the Holloway boys returned, Maple Creek tried to settle. The town held its breath, pretending everything was normal, but tension coiled beneath every conversation. Parents kept their children indoors. Locals whispered about flickering lights and shadows moving through empty fields. At the Holloway home, nothing felt the same. The boys were safe, but they weren't entirely back. Tyler still avoided mirrors. Jaco walked from room to room at night, as if checking for exits. Laura kept a journal, writing down everything they said in their sleep. Phrases like, "The hallway shifted again," or "Don't let the floor think we're lost." Sheriff Danvers continued his investigation with Edith, now treating the case as something more than missing persons. "This isn't just a rescue," he said, flipping through photographs of the spiral stones and the trapdoor. "It's contact. We reached into a place not meant to be reached." Edith pulled out one of Emery Stroud's final pages, dated 1891. It described a phenomenon he called wake echo entities or sounds that slipped through from the other side after a person returned. Stroud believed memory could act like a bridge, she said. But if the anchor stays active, that bridge doesn't always close. That evening, Michael walked past the boys' room and paused. Tyler sat cross-legged on the floor, facing the corner, talking softly to someone unseen. "I told you not to stay," he said. I told you it wasn't safe here." Michael entered quickly, but Tyler looked up and smiled like nothing was wrong. "I wasn't talking to anyone," he said, "just thinking out loud." But the corner of the room was cold, not drafty cold, like stone under snow. Michael reached for the nightlight. It blinked once, then returned to normal. Later that night, Jacob entered the kitchen and opened the fridge. When Laura joined him a few seconds later, he was just standing there, staring inside. "Looking for something?" she asked gently. He didn't look at her. "It doesn't smell like food anymore," he replied. "The air's too loud in here." When she asked what he meant, he simply turned and walked back to bed. Danvers received her call just before 2 a.m. "They're forgetting what's real," she said. "Like the world here doesn't fit the one they came back from." Danvers didn't hesitate. "We need to go back to the site, now." Before sunrise, he and Edith returned to the clearing. The spiral stones were no longer symmetrical. Some had sunk, others leaned, but the trapdoor was still visible, barely. The hinges had warped, the frame buckled, as if resisting being opened again. Danvers opened it anyway. The ladder creaked. The shaft below was dark, unmoving and silent. They lowered a microphone. At first, nothing. Then, faintly, just above the frequency of the static, a whisper came through, and left it open. By morning, the entire Holloway household felt different. The lights dimmed, without flickering. Clocks slowed for a second, then jumped forward. Laura stood in the hallway, staring at a photo of the boys when they were younger. One she was certain had originally been taken at the state fair. Now the background showed trees, twisted, unfamiliar trees. She didn't remember that setting. She blinked hard. The photo was the same, but something about it wasn't. She called Danvers immediately. "It's not just them changing," she said. "Something's changing around them." Danvers returned to the Holloway house with Edith and Deputy Harper. Edith examined the photo, then several others around the house. "They're shifting," she said, "as if whatever came back with the boys is reshaping memory itself. It's not doing it all at once, just little tears in what's familiar." Harper looked at the boys, who sat silently on the porch, their eyes fixed on the woods. "They're aware," he said, "of everything, and they're not surprised." Edith nodded. "They said the spiral acts as a memory anchor. It tethers them to this reality. But if the anchor fractures, the forest remembers how to call them back." Michael took the boys' drawings from a drawer. Spirals, doorways, and rooms that didn't follow earthly geometry. One page was new. It hadn't been there the day before. It showed their house, but with roots crawling up the walls and shadows standing in each window. Jacob had scribbled a note at the bottom. "If we forget why we left, we'll go back." Danvers took a deep breath. "We need to reinforce the memory. Find what's still anchoring them here and protect it." Edith suggested creating a memory chamber, an isolated space surrounded by personal artifacts, sounds and scents familiar to the boys. "If their reality is blending with the one beneath, we need to flood them with reminders of this place, this life," she explained. They converted the guest room into a haven of memory. Childhood photos, toys, clothes, even recorded audio from home videos. They surrounded the boys in layers of remembrance. For a while, it worked. Tyler laughed for the first time in days. Jacob asked for cereal, and when he ate it, he didn't complain that it tasted too loud. But that night, Laura awoke to find her bedroom door wide open. In the hallway, the guest room door was closed, locked, from the inside. She knocked gently, no response. When Michael arrived and forced the door open, the room was empty. The photos lay on the floor. The clothes were rearranged. On the bed, scrawled into the comforter with charcoal, were 5 words. It's folding in from inside. Danvers returned just before dawn. He checked the trapdoor again. This time, he noticed something new etched into the wood. Where no mark had existed before was the spiral. Only this version wasn't closed. It was open, unraveling, like a thread being pulled loose from the world it once held together. Sheriff Danvers stared at the open spiral etched into the trapdoor, his fingers tracing the curve that now refused to loop back into itself. It was different from the earlier drawings, no longer a symbol of containment, but one of release. "It's not just a memory anymore," Edith said quietly behind him. "It's becoming an exit." Danvers looked up sharply. An exit for what? Edith didn't respond at first. She just turned toward the trees, where the fog had thickened again, creeping low and slow, like a tide. Back at the Holloway house, Laura paced the hallway, her nerves unraveling as fast as the spiral itself. The boys were awake, but disoriented. Tyler kept glancing behind furniture, pulling back curtains like he expected something to be watching. Jacob sat on the edge of his bed, whispering into a notebook, as though trying to convince it of something. Michael tried to sit with them, but they both said the same thing, in near unison. "You're becoming hard to remember." That sentence stopped him cold. It wasn't a child's whim. It was a warning. Edith returned with old maps and Stroud's final journal entries. "Look," she said to Danvers, "the spiral always ended closed until his last drawing. It showed the same open spiral, and he marked the date beside it, August 4, 1892. That's the day he vanished without a trace." Danvers stepped back from the trapdoor. He went in, and never came out, just like it's trying to do now with them. Edith pointed to the line in the journal beneath the spiral. "When the anchor opens, the echo walks." Danvers radioed Harper and ordered a 24-hour perimeter around the clearing. "Nobody in, nobody out," he said. "It's no longer about who we can bring back. It's about what might be trying to come through." That night, strange events surged across Maple Creek. Lights in the town flickered again, but this time in rhythm, like code. Livestock refused to enter barns. Phones rang once, then stopped, always at the same time, 3:12 IEM. At the Holloway house, Tyler stood at the window and whispered, "It's looking for a place to stay." Laura knelt beside him. "What is?" He didn't answer, but he lifted his hand and drew an invisible shape on the glass, an open spiral, and on the other side of that same window pane, for just a second, the spiral completed itself. Danvers called an emergency meeting at dawn. "This isn't just residual energy," he said. "The doorway's still open, and it's trying to stabilize here." Edith nodded. "The longer the boys stay close to it, the stronger the connection becomes. If we don't find a way to close it permanently, it may replace our reality with its memory." Danvers glanced toward the trapdoor again. The spiral on its surface had grown, and now it was beginning to turn. The following day, Sheriff Danvers, Edith, and Michael regrouped in the makeshift command trailer parked 50 yards from the clearing. On a whiteboard, Edith outlined Strauss's concept of echo imprinting, a theory that memories, when exposed to certain anomalous environments, become tethered not just to people but to places. "It's like the boys brought back pieces of the place they were in," he explained. "But the spiral staying open means the forest isn't done with them. Worse, the forest may be trying to root itself here." Danvers stared at a series of photos, each one of the trapdoor, over the last 3 days. The spiral's curve had grown bolder in every image. Michael stood abruptly. "Then we seal it, like a wound. If the anchor broke, maybe we can rebuild it." Edith hesitated. "It's possible, but not by force. If memory opened it, only memory can close it." She pulled out an old reference from Stroud's field notes. He wrote of a technique he called a memory seal, a ritual using artifacts of meaning placed in the structure's core to rebalance what he called the memory field. It's not about magic, it's about resonance. Michael's face went pale. Then we need to go back down. Danvers nodded grimly. One last time. That evening, Jacob and Tyler were brought to the clearing, but not to descend. Instead, they were asked to choose 5 items, objects that felt most like them. They picked Tyler's superhero figure, Jacob's sketchbook, a strip of blanket from their childhood bunk beds, a recording of Laura reading bedtime stories, and a photo from a family trip where both boys wore matching green jackets. "These hold the shape of us," Jacob said. "That's what it wants. Something solid. Something it can't shift." The team descended into the spiral chamber with the items packed inside a fireproof case. The chamber had changed. The walls pulsed slightly, like lungs exhaling. The once still air now swirled with warmth and static. Danvers placed each item in a carved recess near the spiral stone in the center. Edith lit a ring of small candles around the perimeter, using Straub's configuration. "Now," she said, "we speak what's real, what we know, and we hold on to it." Michael spoke first. "Your names are Jacob and Tyler Holloway. You were born here. You live here. You are of this place." He repeated it 3 times. Edison followed with a grounding phrase from Stroud's notes. "We name what is. We remember what was. We seal what must not remain." The air thickened. The spiral stone dimmed to grey, then to ash. A crack rang through the floor, not breaking, but sealing. The vibration ceased. The hum faded. The temperature dropped to normal. When they climbed back out, the trapdoor closed on its own. At the Holloway house, the photos returned to their original form. The clock hands stopped skipping, and that night, for the first time in weeks, Jacob and Tyler slept through the night. When Laura checked the baby monitor, there was no static, no voices. Just 2 boys, curled together like they used to, safe under the blankets. And miles away, deep beneath the forest floor, the spiral, etched in stone, was gone. The next day passed quietly in Maple Creek, almost suspiciously so. For the first time in weeks, there were no phone malfunctions, no flickering lights, no whispers on the wind. It rained softly in the morning, clearing by noon, and the sky turned a calm shade of grey bull. For many in town, it was a relief. For Sheriff Danvers and the Holloways, it felt like the eye of a storm. Tyler and Jacob ate breakfast without flinching at noise or light. They played cards. They even laughed. Tentative, cautious laughter, but real. Laura watched them closely, afraid to believe it was truly over. Danvers walked the perimeter of the forest alone just before noon, boots crunching in the damp soil, his eyes scanning the tree line for signs of movement. But the woods looked normal. No ripples in the air, no sudden cold, no spiral stones, just leaves, branches, and silence. He paused near where the trapdoor once sat, now sealed completely by earth and roots. There wasn't even a seam in the ground, like it was never there, he muttered. He placed a marker stone at the site, not as a warning but as a quiet acknowledgement. Something had happened here. Something no one else would ever see. Back at the sheriff's office, Edith compiled everything. Journal pages, photos, recordings, even the broken pieces of the recorder they'd used underground. She logged it under a file she labeled Project Echo. It would never be made public, not unless it happened again. But she couldn't help wondering, had they truly sealed it? Or had they simply stopped one door from opening while others remained quietly waiting? Meanwhile, Jacob sat in the living room with his sketchbook. He drew without pausing, without looking up. When Michael walked past, he glanced at the page. It was a forest scene, trees, a clearing, and two boys sitting side by side on a fallen log. Nothing ominous, nothing strange. But then Michael looked closer. In the corner of the page, almost invisible, was a shape, a spiral. Closed this time, neatly, firmly looped. "Where did you draw that?" he asked gently. Jacob looked up. "So I remember how to keep it that way," he said. That night, Danvers stood on his porch and looked out over Maple Creek. The street lamps glowed evenly. Crickets sang. Not a single thing moved that shouldn't. It was a stillness the town hadn't felt in weeks, but deep inside he knew better than to call it peace. What they had experienced wasn't a story of rescue. It was a brush with something ancient, quiet, and incomprehensible. The forest hadn't been evil. It hadn't been kind. It had simply been... And it had remembered them too. As the sky darkened and the wind curled through the trees, the Holloway porch light flickered, once, only once, and then held steady. The spiral had closed, but memory, like the woods, never really sleeps. A week passed. No further incidents, no mysterious phone pings, and no echoes from beneath. Sheriff Danvers called it a quiet conclusion during a private meeting with the Holloways, Edith, Harper, and two trusted town officials. They gathered inside the town library's old records room, away from prying eyes. "This isn't a case anymore," Danvers said. "It's a chapter of Maple Creek's history we'll never file formally." Michael nodded slowly, while Laura held Tyler's hand. Jacob sat across from Edith, drawing absent-mindedly in his sketchbook. The topic on the table wasn't just what had happened, but what to do about it. "We all agree," Danvers continued, "this doesn't get archived in the official books. Not for now. Not until we understand it better." Edith closed the thick binder labelled Echo Notes, its spine already worn. "Then we create a silence agreement," she said. "We document for ourselves. We keep the evidence sealed. But we don't share it unless something changes." Everyone signed. Danvers placed the file into a secure cabinet with a double lock mechanism. "If this ever opens again," he said, "we'll know where to begin." Harper raised a brow. "And what if it doesn't open? What if it finds another way in?" The room fell into silence. Outside the library, Maple Creek continued as if nothing had ever happened. Children returned to school. The town held its delayed fall market festival. The mayor gave a speech on resilience, completely unaware of the forces that had just brushed against the lives of two boys and a handful of residents. At the Holloway house, Jacob began drawing ordinary things again: soccer fields, tree houses, animals. But Tyler hadn't touched crayons since returning. When asked, he always replied the same way: "They're too easy to smudge." One afternoon, Laura cleaned their shared closet and found an old Polaroid buried beneath a shoebox. She didn't remember taking it, but the date stamped on the white frame read August 7, the day before the boys vanished. In it, Jacob and Tyler stood in their backyard, squinting at the sun. But in the lower left corner, just behind a tree, a faint shape leaned against the trunk. Tall, human-like, too blurred to identify. Laura set the photo aside and didn't mention it to anyone. That night, Danvers reviewed his field notes and flipped to the last page. He wrote in simple block letters: "The forest was never the threat. Memory was." Then he placed the journal in his home safe, locked the drawer, and turned off the light. But just before he walked away, he thought he heard a sound outside his window, a soft tapping. He looked. No one there, only the trees, still and familiar. But the wind carried something else. A phrase he hadn't heard since the underground chamber. To go forward is to go deeper. The silence agreement held firm, but its presence lingered in the edges of everyone's mind, especially for Jacob. He'd resumed school but seemed distanced, like he was only half listening to teachers and classmates. His drawings remained ordinary fields, family, trees, but they all shared one strange feature. Somewhere, often hidden or subtle, each had a spiral. Not glowing, not open, just present. When asked, Jacob shrugged. "If I forget it completely," he said, "it might remember me first." One evening, Edith visited the Holloways with something she hadn't yet shared. Stroud's final letter, never published, never referenced, had been found inside a folded map. It was handwritten, shaky, dated 2 weeks before he disappeared. The last line read, "If they return from the echo, watch the mirrors." She read it aloud as Laura stiffened. "Why the mirrors?" Michael asked. Edith hesitated. Stroud believed that mirrors weren't just reflections. In places touched by the spiral, they became watching surfaces, not by creatures, by the place itself. That night, Jakob stood before the mirror in the hallway. His reflection moved normally at first, but then it blinked before he did. He stepped back. The reflection stood still. When he called for Tyler, the reflection mimicked both of them perfectly, until Jacob whispered, "I remember what's behind you." The mirror cracked. Danvers was called to the house immediately. He brought the notebook recorder, now repaired, and asked Jacob to describe what he'd seen. "It wasn't me," Jacob said. "Not exactly. It looked like me, but it was waiting, like it knew I'd look eventually." Tyler added quietly, "It's still there, just not on the glass anymore." Danvers checked the hallway. The mirror was cracked, but no strange symbols, no frost. Still, he covered it with a cloth. "Let's not give it a reason to come back," he muttered. Days later, the town held a small ceremony to plant a memorial tree in the center of Maple Creek Park. The plaque didn't say, "For the missing." It simply read, "To what we remember and what we choose to forget." Jacob and Tyler stood quietly during the dedication, hands in their pockets, watching the ground. As the tree was lowered into place, a breeze passed through the park. The air turned cold for just a second, and the birds stopped singing. Then everything returned to normal. But back at the Holloway home, on the living room bookshelf, a book neither Laura nor Michael remembered owning shifted outward slightly from the row. Inside it, tucked between pages, was a single torn drawing. One Jacob hadn't made, one no one had ever seen. It showed the trap door, open, and on its stairs a figure climbing up. Not the boys, not a shadow, but something faceless, something remembering its way out. 2 nights after the memorial tree was planted, a subtle unease returned to the Holloway house, not in the form of spirals or static or whispers, but in the stillness. Objects stayed perfectly still for too long. The clocks ticked half a second too slow. Tyler noticed it first. "It's like the house is holding its breath," he whispered to Jacob. That night they slept in the same room again. The door cracked just enough for the hallway light to slip through, but neither slept. And, at exactly 2:17 a.m., they heard the sound, a door opening slowly, but not from inside the house. It came from beneath them. Sheriff Danvers returned the next morning with Harper and Edith. Laura showed them the torn drawing from the mystery book. Edith stared at it in silence. "This is not a warning," she said finally. "It's a rehearsal." Danvers raised an eyebrow. "A rehearsal?" She nodded. "Some doors open only when they're remembered enough times. If it's climbing, it means someone or something is rehearsing re-entry. The forest doesn't force its way in. It waits until it's been welcomed again. Michael clenched his jaw. So what do we do? Pretend it never happened? Edith shook her head. It's too late for that. It knows we're listening now. Jacob's spiral drawings changed that afternoon. Instead of being subtly hidden, they were now dominant, layered, overlapping, and every spiral ended not with a loop, but a crack. He called it the broken way. Tyler, too, began murmuring phrases in his sleep again, only this time not in his voice. Recordings picked up low, garbled echoes of phrases no one could fully understand. Danvers isolated one that played again and again, slowed down. It resembled English. Prepare the place. The steps. Remember. That evening, the Holloways left the house and stayed at Danvers' home. The sheriff placed surveillance inside their residence, motion sensors, audio recorders, even thermal cameras. At exactly 3:12 a.m., the camera in the boy's bedroom caught movement. Not dramatic, not ghost-like, just the slow swing of the closet door. No person inside, no animal, just a rhythm, open 4 inches, hold, then close, open, hold, close. Like a ritual performed by memory, not hands. The next morning, Danvers reviewed the footage with Harper. "What if this isn't about the boys anymore?" Harper asked. "What if the place found something new to hold on to?" Danvers sat back, eyes on the paused frame, the half-open closet door, and said quietly, "Then, it's not trying to return. It's trying to stay." Edith reviewed Stroud's letter again, focusing on one line she hadn't previously emphasized. The echo only needs one room, just one, to rehearse its return. It begins with the furniture remembering its shape. That night, when Michael returned to grab a few belongings from the house, he found something chilling. All the chairs in the kitchen had been moved, aligned perfectly in a circle, just like the drawings Tyler made in the early days, and on the table, drawn in dust, was the open spiral. Michael backed out of the kitchen slowly, eyes fixed on the circle of chairs. There were 6. None had been moved that way earlier. No one had been in the house. The dust was disturbed only in that space. Everywhere else remained untouched. At the center of the circle, drawn with a fingertip in the thick layer of grime, was a single word. "Stay." He called Danvers immediately. Within the hour, the sheriff, Harper, and Edith were back at the Holloway home. They inspected the scene carefully, collecting samples of the dust and documenting every detail. "It's not the chairs that matter," Edith said. "It's the intent. The circle mimics a gathering point. The forest used one underground. This is a mirror of that room." Harper's face was pale. "So it's recreating the space here," Edith nodded. "Piece by piece, room by room." Jacob, sitting at Danvers' home with Laura and Tyler, started drawing again that night without realizing. When Laura checked on him, his page was covered in crude floor plans of their house, drawn from impossible angles, like someone who had walked through the walls and mapped it from within. One drawing showed a spiral not in the clearing or the basement, but in the center of their living room rug. Tyler, meanwhile, stood at the window. "We shouldn't have brought our memories back," he said. "We taught it how to remember us." Danvers made a decision. "We need to erase the anchors, the ones it's using now. Not the memory of the boys, but the objects tied to the echo." They returned to the Holloway house the next day and began systematically removing anything with symbolic weight. The rug from Jacob's dream, the dining chairs, Tyler's broken recorder, even the family photos with the faint tree distortions. Each item was sealed in a steel lockbox to be stored off-site. "We're cutting off its map," Danvers said. "If it can't trace its way through memory, it can't hold a place here." That night, they waited. Monitors placed in the now empty house remained steady. The rooms were stripped bare, almost eerily so. At 2:17 IEM, a high-pitched frequency sounded from the baby monitor, just a blip, then silence. At 3:12 IEM, the motion sensor in the hallway detected slight vibration, but no visual. Harper confirmed no heat signatures. But when Danvers returned at dawn, something new was on the living room floor. A small, unmarked notebook. None of them had left it. Inside, on the first page, written in Tyler's handwriting, but shakier, were the words, "We tried to forget it too." Edith flipped through the rest. The pages were blank, except for the very last one. A phrase, repeated 3 times in 3 different sizes. "Echoes don't sleep, they rehearse." And beneath that, a spiral, open, then closing, then open again. By the end of that week, the Holloway house was no longer livable, not because it was physically unsafe, but because every room felt watched, not by people, but by the residue of something rehearsing how to be them. "It's not haunting," Edith said. "It's imitating. Reconstructing comfort so it can slip in unnoticed." Danvers relocated the family to a secure guest house just outside town. Surveillance was increased, memory items were sealed in reinforced containment boxes. But the air didn't clear. If anything, it got heavier. Jacob grew quieter each day. His drawing stopped altogether. One night he whispered to Tyler, "I think it already made a room that looks like us." When Tyler asked what he meant, Jacob said, "It's learning to be what we remember so it doesn't have to stay beneath anymore." The next morning, Danvers received a report from Harpo. A local utility worker had gone missing, last seen inspecting a power substation near the forest's edge. His truck remained. His tools were undisturbed. No footprints, no calls. Just a silence that stretched too far. Danvers and Edith visited the site. The area surrounding the substation was littered with leaves, none moved, windless, unnatural. At the far edge of the clearing, pressed into the soil, was a circle of small rocks arranged in the same configuration as the clearing where the trapdoor once opened. But no spiral. Instead, a perfect loop, as if the echo had now mastered closure. "It's not trying to escape anymore," Edith said quietly. "It's establishing presence, permanence." Inside Danvers' office, the sealed notebook, the one found on the Holloway's floor, began emitting faint heat, not warmth, but memory resonance, as Edith called it. When opened, the blank pages remained empty, except for one. A diagram of a house, not the Holloway's, but something resembling it, and inside the diagram, 5 labelled rooms: bedroom, kitchen, hall, echo room, and the last one, the forgotten door. Danvers ran background on the house design. To their shock, it matched an abandoned property blueprint on file from 1952, located on the opposite side of the forest. Long demolished, long erased. But the echo had drawn it, remembered it. "It's not bound to the Holloways," Danvers said. "It's bound to anyone who's ever brushed against that memory threshold." That night, Jacob spoke, again, for the first time in days. "I had a dream," he told Laura. "We were in our house, but it wasn't our house. Everything was softer, quieter, like it had been dreaming us back." Laura asked what woke him up. He said, "I saw the forgotten door, and it saw me too." Danvers stared out his office window later that night. No movement, no wind, but he couldn't shake the feeling something had shifted again. Not outside, not below, inside. Danvers couldn't sleep. He sat in his office with the diagram of the imitation house on his desk, tracing the lines between the labelled rooms. Every section had structure, walls, hallways, corners, except one, the forgotten door. It wasn't connected to anything. No walls surrounded it, no path led in or out. It floated, isolated, intact. This is the door, he said to himself. That doesn't need a frame because it doesn't belong to any one place. That morning, Jacob stood at the guest house window and told Laura, "We need to find the place the door wants to be. If we don't, it'll just keep finding us." Edith returned with more of Straub's fragmented research. "He believed certain memories weren't personal, but ambient," she explained. "Things the land remembers. That's how the echo spreads. It doesn't attach to people, it attaches to where they felt most real." She flipped open a page. A phrase, repeated several times. "The echo always returns to the door that made it real." The team headed out with maps and field gear, following the old foundation records of the demolished 1952 house. The property was located past the northern edge of the forest, long overtaken by time. When they arrived, they found what remained half-buried steps, a moss-covered threshold, and the faint outline of walls that hadn't stood in decades. But at the far corner of the lot, standing between two gnarled trees, was something new. 2 vertical beams. No door. No hinges. Just wood, upright. Waiting. Edith froze. "That's the same structure from the clearing." Danvers nodded grimly. "The spiral's not opening anymore. The door is." They approached cautiously. The air was unnaturally still. No birds, no bugs. As they neared the threshold, their breath fogged. Michael held out the drawing Jacob had made of the forgotten door. The alignment was exact. Then the wind returned. Hard, sudden, it swept through the forest like a pulse. Danvers reached out to touch one of the beams, and the world around them blinked. Just once, like reality skipped a frame, and then they saw it through the invisible doorway, a glimpse of something else, a version of the Holloway home. Perfect. Still. Dimly lit, but wrong. No shadows, no reflections, no life. Just a house-shaped echo holding its breath. They stepped back in unison. The vision disappeared. Back at the guest house, Jacob and Tyler were asleep. But in their room, Laura noticed something had shifted. The wall opposite their beds was damp, a perfect rectangle of condensation. Not from a leak. It was too precise. Like a door was trying to form itself on the wall. Later that night, Danvers stood in front of the doorway in the woods again. The beams remained unchanged. But in the dirt beneath, someone or something had carved a message. "We built the frame. You filled the room." And he knew, if the forgotten door opened, it wouldn't be about memory anymore. It would be about replacement. The following day began like the others, but beneath its surface, the truth stirred. The forgotten door had revealed itself, not as a relic or a portal, but as a mirror, waiting for permission. Edith, pale and exhausted, gathered everyone in Danvers' office and laid out the final piece from Stroud's archive. A torn page, dated in shaking ink. "The only defense against imitation is the original." "What does that mean?" Michael asked. Edith turned to the boys. "You're the only ones who remember what it really felt like. Your home, your family, this town. The forest didn't take your memories. It rewrote them. But if you can recall the truth vividly, clearly, you can fracture the imitation before it finishes building itself." That afternoon, the group returned to the site of the forgotten door. Laura stayed with the boys just beyond the tree line. Danvers, Edith, and Michael stepped forward. The beams hadn't changed, but the space between them felt warmer, tighter, more ready. In Jacob's notebook was one final sketch. A spiral drawn backward, its curl tightening instead of opening. "He drew this last night," Laura said, then said, "Let's show it who we are." It wasn't defiance, it was clarity. Edith held the notebook and walked forward, reciting pieces of Jacob's earlier journal entries, the ones that felt most honest. Danvers added the phrases the boys had spoken in the chamber. Michael unfolded the photo of the boys in green jackets and placed it on the ground between the beams. The air quaked, the doorway shimmered, and for the first time, the imitation on the other side reacted twitching, like film struggling to hold its shape. The house within it began to fracture. Windows disappeared, walls bent at wrong angles. The door at its center, the echo of the forgotten door, started to collapse inward. The spiral on its surface unraveled. Behind them, the boys stood with Laura, whispering the truth. We live here, not it. We remember the storm, the pie, the old bunk bed that creaked. We remember what it didn't. The beams shook. A sharp gust blasted through the clearing. Dust and dead leaves curled in spirals, then fell flat. The structure gave a low groan, like timber resisting gravity, and then cracked. One beam split down the center. The shimmer vanished. And the imitation forest behind it disappeared, with a snap of absence. Silence followed, not oppressive, final, as if something exhaled and left. Danvers stared at the now empty threshold. It's gone? Edith closed the notebook. No, she said, it's just uninvited. Michael turned to his boys. Is it over? Jacob, tired but grounded, nodded. It's quiet again, in the places we can't see. Tyler added, and the house doesn't dream us anymore. That night, the Holloways returned home. No spiral drawings, no mirror whispers, no chairs in circles, only warmth, familiarity, realness. Laura made hot chocolate. The boys argued over blankets. And when the wind passed through the trees, it sounded like wind, nothing more. In Sheriff Danvers' journal, he wrote one last note beneath all the others. It never wanted to destroy us. It just didn't know how to forget. And for the first time in months, Maple Creek slept and rested unwatched, unrehearsed. Oh, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to Storiosity, and share your favorite moment of this story in the comments.